best lecture ever, I think, because all the time I'm in these stuffy buildings and stuffy lecture halls, and with this weather you really want to be outside. So absolutely amazing. So maybe some other people will come around. Yeah, great, fantastic. So my name is Bram Buscher, and I joined Wageningen the 1st of January, so I'm very new. And but I've done some 15 years research now on what I started calling neoliberal conservation, and I think there's no better place to talk about neoliberal conservation than here in Wageningen, and to make the connections with the neoliberal university. So basically what I wanted to do is just lay give a bit of an introduction into kind of the stuff that I've been doing and what this term entails, and then make some of my own connections, and then kind of invite you to make your connections and have some discussions, right? And so my friend Hugo, right, will also continue in the same vein, I think, on climate versus capitalism and extraction. So we'll see how this goes. But in any event, if there's any questions or anything, I'd rather do the both ways instead of just a one-way kind of thing. So please let me know if you have any questions or you want to discuss certain things. So basically I started my work in Southern Africa. I had a Marxist geographer as my supervisor, and he told me that everything was, the big fall of capitalism, and that I should take that into account to do my research on local parks. And at first I just figured, okay, I just want to talk to people, do ethnographic field research, see what people actually say. After 2 years of research in Southern Africa, I kind of could no longer deny that there was something going on that I could only explain by, taking these crazy concepts of neoliberalism or capitalism into account. And I really started theorizing that more. And for me, what's really interesting about, and potentially dangerous about neoliberal conservation, is that over, say, 3-4 centuries of sort of capitalist development, we've created all kinds of geographies, all kinds of environments that are amenable to global processes of capital accumulation. And again, please interrupt me if I don't make any sense anymore. But we built, incredible infrastructures, harbors, roads, the whole thing, big universities, to continue this process, right, of capital accumulation. For me, this comes down to the very definition of capital, namely putting forth money in order to make more money. Capital for me is not a resource, a thing that you can just put somewhere else. It's really about, putting forth money or resources in order to make more. So there's an inherent kind of dynamic of growth, repetition, and of circulation sort of embedded in all of that. And the university has become sort of an inherent part of that, right? From the start of higher educational institutes, and this is really not something that is very new. Marx and others have been writing about that for a long time. So since the 18th century, that knowledge would be placed in the pursuit of this further process, how to get capital rolling, how to make it smoother, so we all sort of part of this game, we all play this game, but in the process, of course, with enormous impacts on our natural environments. I don't think I have to explain that here. I guess many of you study this stuff, so I won't go into all the environmental problems that we have, from ocean acidification to climate change to biodiversity loss. I guess you know more or less what I'm talking about here. But the logic sort of that got us into the problem is now the basis for the solution. And that to me is, a big contradiction. That is what I'm primarily focused on and interested in my research on neoliberal conservation. So neoliberal conservation is sort of like a historical development for me. Over time, over 300 years, that capitalism has become more and more global, has become more and more all-encompassing, has taken all kinds of sectors and sort of reconfigured it in the pursuit of further accumulation. And the response to that, in terms of that, capitalists now themselves understand, like, hey, there's a problem here. We can't go on the way that we've been going for the last couple of decades and or centuries. We really have to change, this, and the way that they try to do this is by actually taking nature conservation and the protection of nature into account in the system, in the global capitalist system. That is really what we refer to with this idea of neoliberal conservation. So it's about trying to solve a contradiction by sort of enlarging it. And there's all kinds of things that are now invented or put in the practice of that seeming solution. I don't know whether you've heard of things like payments for ecosystem services or sustainability derivatives or wetland credits. Any of these? No? Doesn't ring a bell? You have? Okay. So kind of, the tools that got us into the financial crisis are now supposedly going to help us out of the environmental crisis. So what's really being done, and so theoretically this is interesting for me, and I won't bother you too much with that because if you're interested in it, I can give you a huge big lecture on how I try to sort of rethink sort of Marxist work on environment by sort of taking into account or taking very seriously how to sort of commoditize conservation. And the big difference for me is this, namely that when you chop a tree and you make a table from it, everybody understands that this is kind of capital, right? You can ship it around the world and you can sell it, you can buy it, etc., etc. So what happens if you don't chop the tree, you don't make a table from it, but you leave the tree standing, but at the same time you want to commoditize it? How does that work? And that brings up a lot of problems, obviously. There's a lot of people in this university trying to solve those very problems. So in environmental sciences and plant sciences, there's a lot of people here doing very serious work, doing very difficult work to try to solve that problem. So how do we commoditize, how do we render monetary ecosystem services, right? The services that trees, that water, that the climate and all of those kind of things provide to us. So you can understand that that's not very easy. Ecosystems themselves don't let themselves be monetized or put themselves into numbers very quickly. And so I can tell you, there's plenty of people that are making incredible careers on that. But I've sort of made my career sort of critiquing that, sort of showing that I don't think that that is actually going to solve any problem. It's actually going to make it worse. It's actually going to deepen the problem, and it's not actually about solving the environment in the first place. It's actually about saving capitalism or saving neoliberalism. We all know that in the last couple of years we had a major, big capitalist economic crisis, and capitalism is always, in one way or another, trying to look for new markets, for new ways to continue the same process, right? Coming back to this definition of capital. To find ways to get people to work harder, to get more markets, for people to buy more stuff, etc., etc. It's something going on for hundreds of years. So now we are at the current phase of in the world where we are sort of seeing the end of geographical expansion. Most parts of the world, perhaps certain parts, certain areas, certain parts of Africa, certain other parts are not yet fully sort of encapsulated in the market system, but many areas are, and so there's not much more spread that you can do. So you have to intensify and sort of change existing ways of looking at certain things and change them to also become part of this broader process. So that is, for me, also what is going on. And universities play a crucial role in that, right? Universities like Wageningen University, like many universities around the world, play an absolute crucial role in that, to provide sort of the knowledge systems that make it believable that we can commoditize nature, environmental services, water, wetland credits, and all those kind of things. To put into place the mathematical, the economic, the econometric models that render those kind of things believable and exchangeable on the market. And a lot of things I can say about that, but there are sort of two main problems with that. First of all, that nature doesn't let itself be rendered into money very easily. So how do you quantify a wetland? How do you quantify a tree, and the services it provides? How do you quantify, a whole ecosystem? And especially, how do you quantify all of that over time? Right? The key thing about ecology, of course, is that everything is connected to everything else, and that in this dynamic interaction over time, things change and ecosystems remain healthy. This is sort of ecology 101. So how do you, you can commodify a giraffe or one tree. You can say it's worth so much. But how do you commodify the relation between different trees over time, right? This is very, very difficult. And we don't hear much about that, but a colleague of mine from Canada, Jessica Dempsey, has been going to sort of high-level international UN meetings where experts from all over the globe come together to try to do exactly that, to try to quantify these kind of things. So for me, that's I would say even inherently anti-ecological. Right? So that is the first problem. Yes?
Why is that? Because if you value, for example, a wetland, then people see, oh, it's that worth, so let's preserve it. So it's not a problem. They even value it more if you see how much worth it is actually.
Yeah.
Because research has shown that people do not value wetlands that much, and they will build it over.
Yeah, and I think that's the crucial thing. It's actually coming to my second problem. It's the value system that matters. But I don't say that you should value wetlands. To value them in monetary terms and make them part of a system that is inherently growth-oriented and has no boundaries, that doesn't know when to stop. That for me is the problem. And this is the thing that initiatives like TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystem and Biodiversity, or UN agencies, they talk about valuing nature, right? We need to value and evaluate nature. But for me, this is a very strange thing, as though we didn't value nature before. I don't need a price tag on nature in order to value it, and I can tell you that most of the people in the world, over history, never needed price tags to value nature. In fact, for most other cultures, that is actually, like an offensive thing to say, right? To even think that, it would be on the level of, okay, so how much is your daughter worth, right? Can I buy your child? You may laugh, but actually, the way that we are also commoditizing nature on the molecular scale, right, on the DNA scale, it probably won't take too long before we start having to pay Monsanto if we want to have a baby, because they own the DNA that we are made of, right? That probably is one step too far. But for many cultures around the world, thinking about commoditizing nature in that way is exactly the same thing. It's just unfathomable, right? And that is where a lot of people need to do a lot of work to also make that more acceptable, right? To make this kind of the natural kind of thing, and we can't think outside of that. And again, that's for me the link also with the neoliberal university, right? So besides the fact of how the university operates, I guess you guys have been having discussions about that over the last week already, okay, so how is this university structured? How are other universities structured? How does that relate to broader political economic processes? What are the pressures on students? What are the pressures on teachers? All of that kind of stuff. That is the same process as what's going on in relation to how do we deal with the question of the environmental crisis. They're for me the same logic, right? And that's for me how I also try to connect them, but also how in many different, of course very complex ways, but in the basis how they come together as two variants of the same bigger problem. Both nature and knowledge need to become part of this process of capital accumulation. And in order to do that, you need to squeeze nature in a particular way so that it provides that kind of value. You need to quantify and commodify it. And the same with teachers, and the same knowledge, you need to quantify and commodify it, intellectual property rights and all of that kind of stuff in order to make that part of the same system. And so those battles are not unconnected. In fact, they're highly connected, and that's my main point that I want to make here today. I think, in thinking about all of these things, really look at other areas of the world, and these are just two, obviously. Hugo will talk related issues in a moment, but also the health area, also labor issues, also the infrastructural issues, etc., etc. They all, all these kind of things are in that sense related and come back to that same kind of logic of how I defined capital. I kind of had another thing that I wanted to say, but I kind of forgot. So maybe it's better if you have any particular questions or any particular things that you think are interesting to continue on. Then please let me know. Otherwise, I'll first give the microphone to Hugo, and then we can hear his part of the story, broaden the discussion. Yeah.
So I will talk louder. I think that if you put a price on nature, you don't change anything. I think you will even because so now it's good. Yeah. I think if you put a price on nature, you are actually gonna make it worse because we don't change anything. Because how it is now, if someone has money, they can do stuff, and then they can do more stuff. They can buy nature and they can cut down on trees. Or I don't know. So I think to put a price on nature, you are actually destroying nature too.
Yeah. So if I give an example of that, so Rose was saying that you create all kinds of inequalities. Let me give you one example. RED is an initiative reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Heard of this? It's a global sort of initiative to try to save nature where it's cheapest, right? So nature in the south, in the global south, where labor is cheaper, is more easily saved than in the global north. And so we should have, and this is how it works according to the global carbon market as well, so that northern organizations or industries or others can buy certain kind of credits, and that would then ultimately, and those credits are bought from southern forests or grasslands or what have you, that can save carbon, and that is then supposed to offset the kind of emissions that we put out here. So that's a totally different thing than actually taking first, you see that you haven't really seen a dip other than the prices. The only big dip in sort of the rise of emissions over the last, say, 10-15 years was around 2007 and 8 during the financial crisis, or a little bit afterwards, 2009. And so it's a way of sort of buying off your responsibility, right? The way a market system works. I mean, let other people solve it for you. But this is where a thing like, for example, the Jevons paradox comes in. Jevons was a political economist from the 1880s or so, again a long time ago. None of this stuff is really new, right? And he said that if you do these kind of things in a competitive environment, then the money that you save from doing certain things, so by conserving nature in the south where it's cheaper, that money that is saved doesn't lie fallow, right? It doesn't just lie there in the bank and it's not used for anything. No, that's reinvested in other things, right? Remember again what I started out with: capital is money invested to make more money. So it's always this same process. And David Harvey, a famous geographer, Marxist geographer, actually says that the problem with the world is not that there's not enough money. There's actually too much money going around looking for profitable ways to invest in order to get that investment out. He talks about a healthy capitalist economy grows by 3% a year, right? In the Netherlands now, the last couple of days we've heard Jeroen Dijsselbloem and others saying, we're not getting to 3% yet. We're about 1.5% this year. So that's a lot better than what we had before. So we should all be happy now, no matter what we see in terms of inequalities or work pressure or psychological issues with people or nature or whatever. The economy is growing, hence we're all happy. And we have that, we have that ball rolling again. But how do you, so if 3%, if global economy grows by about 3% a year, I don't know how big the global economy is. Maybe Hugo knows, but let's 70 trillion dollars. So if you take 3% of that, what is that? I'm a social scientist. You guys must help me here. What is 3% of 70 trillion? Yeah, well, a lot of money. Let's just say a lot of money. Many billions. Those billions are mostly held by investment banks looking for profitable ways to invest that money, right? For profitable ways in order to invest that money and hence get more money out of that. And so that process, continues and nature is now becoming part of that, right? Nature is a crucial source for those kind of processes. And in that, all kinds of new inequalities are generated. So besides the Red Initiative, you have a lot of global, very powerful billionaires buying up huge tracts of land in the global south, right? As parks, try to protect these kind of parks, and saying that they're doing good for the environment. All kinds of things, and local people, are being dispossessed from their land as a result. So a lot of new inequalities are being created. I don't have a good overview here, but if you're interested, I can certainly look that up for you. But all kinds of inequalities are created in that process that we don't quite see, right? That happens sort of in the actual workings of how the global economy works. So, crucial point, absolutely. Any other points? Here.
What's for putting the price tag on nature?
Yeah, I think Bram is really of the issue in a very critical way, and for me, I also want to think that the issue of neoliberalism, and how we move beyond it, the capitalist system, the university should not only end at reformulating the way the university constitutes itself in terms of research, in terms of who funds who to produce what. But beyond this, we're also talking about, I would want to say it is a battle of stories. Those stories matter. And within the university, the fact that the knowledge produced within the university is so political, in the sense that what your political orientation is also what manifests in your ideas and the way you articulate the idea. But of course, some people always miss out in this political, if you like, gambling, and that is local people. Consistently, the university has given a face, like we, particularly for academics who are very connected to grassroots people, they take it as a kind of responsibility to represent those people. And over again, what I have noticed is that in our attempt to represent the very people whose voices don't reach the university circles, we even end up exposing them, exposing their stories, exposing their, where if you are an entrepreneur, you can get some documents to think about the stories of people and see where to hit. Now, so in a way, you tend to come to terms with the fact that we have told so much about communities through research. We have told so much, we've gotten a lot from various angles of local people, communities, societies, and opportunists, people who want to use knowledge and convert knowledge for their advantage, also step in. Because if you tell me the stories of poor people in Ghana, for example, it doesn't really end up you telling me stories about poor people. But if I am very entrepreneurial oriented, I am able to also now use that information to spot where my business should hit at. Now, then, what I would want to argue is that beyond thinking about making the university more de-neoliberalized, we also have to think about how we make the university, and its political orientations in terms of knowledge production become more fairer. Breaking the bounds of, because local people have knowledge, they have insight about what they do. But the moment we tend to make the university the center of expert knowledge production, then their knowledge systems become more relevant. Because even when they argue their case, they say, this is bullshit kind of knowledge. This is the scientific version. So we need to use scientific data over local knowledge system. And so how do we also go beyond representing the people's story in an expert-oriented way, but giving the force to the local knowledge itself in a way that doesn't make it, slip off or die out in the hands of expert engagement with grassroots people. I think this is really the issue that we also have to integrate in our thinkings about de-neoliberalizing the university system, so that it doesn't end up like, okay, if we have more academics who are thinking in a non-neoliberalized way, all will be good. No, all will not be good in my view, because then we have still left a marginalized group of people still not being represented fairly. Yeah.
I guess you've been discussing this maybe at other points of time. Yeah, the relation between knowledge produced here and knowledge produced elsewhere. What counts as valuable and what doesn't count as valuable. Because in anthropology those are big discussions.
Yeah, we had that discussion yesterday night, and you can actually watch it on YouTube.
You have them.
It's on YouTube, you can watch it. It's really interesting. What I wanted to ask is quite a big question maybe, but how in your view how can we push it back? How can we push back this neoliberalization of ecology and also of our university or the university in general? What is your vision on that?
For me, I always start, and I've said this now a couple of times already, but hopefully then, if there's one point that lingers, then that might be that thing. It's coming back to that same definition of capital, right? That's I sort of keep coming back to that same type of logic, and I think realistically we have to have a sort of two-pronged strategy. In the sense, in the longer term, and I'm not afraid. Some other people say that it's completely unrealistic, but for me, I don't see why we couldn't think about a world beyond capitalism or a world beyond neoliberalism. I don't think it's very realistic at the moment, but I think in 100, 150 years from now, or however long, we will need to get there, and we will get there. I'm actually, just thinking about it in that way has always made me sort of like very, I don't know, sometimes you get so upset and angry or about all the stuff that's going on, but actually thinking that this is a temporary thing and it has to at some point give way has helped me to quiet down a little bit and sort of, canalize my own frustrations with these kind of things. But also reading sort of on the history of capitalism. Capitalism has only been around for 200-300 years, so in the whole, history of humankind, it's quite a short period. And it's been promoted consistently by there's a lot of equity behind it. And people very deliberately continue to promote the same type of logic. And I think your comment here was I think is fantastic, very important. It's sort of like delegitimizing other types of knowledge, other types of ways of being in the world, right? Not as an entrepreneur, but as a human being. Not as somebody who's competitive, but who's cooperative. Not as somebody who is focused on the market, but somebody's focused on other ways of living our life and interacting. So that for me is always the longer term strategy, right? So you have to have this vision about this other type of world in the back of your mind. And in the shorter period is to really sort of again look at that logic and try to sort of frustrate it wherever you can. Right? It's sort of like make linkages with other people, get into discussions. For me, I sort of kind of made it my whole work, obviously, my whole academic life is only about the critiquing the other role. I guess I'm sort of privileged, a great respect in relation to that as well, because not many people can actually, make their lives from that. But in the process, I always try to get that kind of message out. And if I get into positions where you can make certain decisions, to always stress not that circulation process, not putting more pressure on people, not thinking about people in terms of capital, or human resources, right? Human capital or natural capital, but actually thinking about them as individuals, as people, and as collectives, and as political agents. That for me is super crucial. I don't think it's all of you as consumers. If you buy the right stuff, we will buy ourselves out of trouble. That's complete nonsense, right? I think all of us are political agents, and we should, where we can, each and every point, make, our thoughts and ideas about certain things known, and get into debates with other people about these kind of things. This is a great example, but there's many more ways in which that can be done. And very concretely, like if you think about new positions opening up at the university, we're having fairly big debates now where we should direct those new positions towards. We have a new director coming in at social sciences, and there was a big debate, should the person be more market oriented? And I said no, let's be more cooperative oriented. Somebody that understands that academia is a public good, right? The university is a public institute, not a market institute, right? And we work for a greater good that is above and beyond, both the government and the market. And that's my kind of philosophy in life. I guess you all have your own. And it's not a very easy, clear-cut answer, but I don't believe in any clear-cut answers. If you get anybody that says that there's a magic bullet or silver bullet for any of these kind of things, then they're lying. So that's pretty much what I can give you. But I think maybe Hugo has a couple of other suggestions.
Well, I think, we are improvising today's New University. We just decided half an hour ago that we would do this together. I'm Hugo. I'm not working employed as a scientist. I studied ecology in the 70s in Utrecht. Went 3 years to Ecuador, came back, no work for biologist, went back to university, studied some computer science and worked for a long time in that. But since 2009, let's say, another part of my life started when I became involved in climate change, global warming, activism, went to Copenhagen, the COP15, which was a complete failure. I mean, Bram, he explained a lot of things are not working. One important thing of Copenhagen was it failed, but it was clear that it failed, and it was undeniable that it failed completely. And it was the COP15, and this year we're going to have the COP21. And no politics, no economics, not the free market, not the climate negotiations in the UNFCCC is ever going to save the planet. So we started in 2010 in Holland, Wij Stoppen Steenkool, which I'm now active in. Before I forget, we organized the climate games on Saturday, 4th of July. And there's also a camp around it, which is called Ground Control, which is a few days before and a few days after that. We can talk maybe later on about certain details. I also got some graphs over there, some more information. I'll try to keep it short now. Skip a couple of billion years of climate change. The Earth was frozen 700 million years ago. It became defrozen, climate went up and down, and with some changes 35 million years ago the ice sheets formed at the level of CO2 that we will reach now in about 20 years time. in fact, there's one graph, as we are on agriculture, I concentrate a little bit of agriculture, the influence of agriculture on climate change and climate change on agriculture. And okay, here's the graph. If you want to look at it later on, or otherwise believe me, the latest 10,000 years has been the most. Never. They call me in now. The last 10,000 years has been the most stable climate in history that we know, at least since humans exist. And 10,000, 11,000 years ago, humans started with agriculture. We could start with agriculture because the climate was so stable. Because if you have to select plants year after year after year after year for the best ones, it only works if the next year will be similar to this year and the year after that similar. So during 10,000 years we did amazing things. The most amazing thing I find, we developed grain in Europe and rice in Asia, and these crazy Mexicans, they made maize out of it, these big, it's incredible. 10,000 years of selection carefully. There's an incredible biodiversity. There are thousands of races of potatoes in the Andes because every side of the mountain has its own microclimate with difference in altitude, more or less sun, more or less rain, etc., etc. Thousands of rainbows. They're also losing I wanted to refer to one book. I once read a book. It's a standard book on ecological economy from Robert Costanza, founder of ecological economy. And the summary for the book, for me, is almost in one drawing, two rectangles. The large rectangle, it says it's the ecological space. The small rectangle inside it is the economical space. Economics is part of the ecology. Economical space, it uses resources from the ecological space and it dumps its waste in the ecological space. So the economical space cannot grow more than a certain level. Economy is part of ecology and not the other way around. Ecologists should be in charge. So now the point is where we're going very short. Climate change, if you follow the science, it is much more worse than what you read in the papers. I'll just give only one example is sea level rise, which is by the IPCC is estimated to be at most 80 centimeters by 2100. Even that is bad because then we know it will still go up. But it's worse. There are now, they're not signs. It's a fact now that certain ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica are destabilized beyond the point of no return. And the most renowned scientist, climate scientist in the world is famous James Hansen, 30 years director of NASA Institute, Goddard Institute of Space Studies. And he says he's working on a publication, but he said in a radio interview shortly ago that he expects in a few decades a few meters of sea level rise. And I had to re-listen that like 5 times, and it's that James Hansen had said, otherwise I wouldn't have believed it. If he says it, he did some calculations and he will come up with a publication. So if you didn't hear it well, in a couple of decades, maybe a couple of meters sea level rise. So now, how are we going with agriculture to save this problem? Because the climate is not only global warming, it is global irregularity. The climate is warming, but it's becoming irregular also, and it's just what we cannot have with the species. So everything is changing. The climate zones are changing. In fact, the climate zones are now going north, and of course also going south on the other side of the world, by 7 kilometers per year. 7 kilometers per year. In after the last ice age, when it was warming up in a couple of thousand years, it was like 200 meters a year. So people never noticed that the ice age, nobody ever said, oh, the ice age is ending or something like that. You know, 6 kilometers, that is like 6 kilometers in a generation if you calculate 30 years. So you walk a little through the wood, you don't notice, and now it's 7 kilometers. Of course, the problem is that not every species does move at the same speed, because some animals can move fast, and fungus, and then the trees, they cannot walk 7 kilometers a year. So it's all destabilizing, and agriculture is destabilizing also. And the question is now the big problem for agricultural science: how grow food in the future, because the food that we have is adapted to 10,000 years of stable climate, which is gone already. This year is now officially an El Nino year. Read about it. This is going to be a bad year for climate. A lot of rain in South America, and a lot of drought in more than normal, even in Australia and Indonesia, with forest fires and everything. And so it's going to be a bad year. So how are we going to grow our food in the future? That is, and food is going to be, is of course the most important problem for humanity. We can move if sea level rises. Yeah, all these deltas, the Nile Delta, 40 million people, Mekong Delta, 17 million people, coastal cities, they will flood, but you can say, okay, we move. But if we can't grow the food, glaciers are melting. In the Andes, 60 million people depend on the glacier water. In California, the drought is related to because it's raining and it's not snowing. And in the Himalaya, from the Himalaya, 1 billion people are dependent on the water from the glaciers. So I wonder, and I'd like to talk more later with you, maybe on food or music. Are you learning something about that here at the university? What is university? Okay. The FAO just, and then I stopped the FAO just a couple of months ago. Published a report, 130 pages, about genetic resources, climate change, food production, and have some suggestions. We have to preserve nature, and not because of a calculated value, it's because in the nature is the genetic resource. Of we already lost a lot. A lot is. How much do we know? As an ecologist, we know very little. Recently there was a publication, and the new publication says that the best estimate now is that the number of tree species in the world is between tropical tree species is between 40,000 and 53,000. So we don't even know the number of species in the tropical forest. It within like 20%. So if we don't know how much species there are, we don't know which trees there are, unless the varieties and their value. And the value is, as Bram also said, not the value of the one tree, but the value in the whole ecosystem. Because if you take one part of out of an ecosystem, the ecosystem can collapse. So even the trees are, pretty big. That's why trees. You can see them, and those are the trees. If we don't even know about the trees, and I think only like 100 trees in the world are investigated scientifically because they are production trees like apples and fruit and rubber. And the other trees we only know the name, and they are in some book that they exist with the name. And the other ones we don't know, and it's just the trees. And then you got the plants and the shrubs, and you got small animals, and you got insects and fungi and bacteria, and we don't know these ecosystems. We have to preserve, because there are the genetic resources we are going to need to adapt food for the future. I refer to the FAO again. We need these genetic resources to cross with the food that we have and hope for the best and see what happens. Okay.
It was a really nice speech. Thanks. Bram now has to leave. So if you have a last question or remark for him, you should do it now.
But next week, Mingy here is organizing another lecture series, I think, on climate change, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be more on climate change. And
But
when?
it's not on. It's in 2 weeks, Tuesday. Then you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But next week Monday there's also like an event here in Forum on Monday, and it will be about global ways, how to reduce CO2, and like it will also be about the Blockadia movement in the Netherlands, which tries to bring together like all the environmental movements that exist in the Netherlands, like also like the state called movement in Groningen and different organizations, and try to see what we can do and how we can work together to do these things.
Right. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you so
Keep up
much.
the good-
Yeah. Then are there questions for?
Yeah, thank you. I think you've spoken quite a lot. If we are thinking about diagnosing a non-capitalist university, then I think that we should stick our necks high and dig deeper to understand all the schemes that are, connected to the system of capitalism itself. And I think beyond knowledge, the production of certain kinds of knowledge which sustains the capitalist system, we should also be thinking about fear and hope. Fear. Fear. Our fear. Yeah, the way we fear about things. And hope. No. F-E-A-R.
Fear.
Yeah, fear. And our hopes. And for me, I have so many doubts about why, for example, in the university, every subject or every topic you want to discuss or write a thesis about should be conceptualized in a problematic way. Consistently we have been a bit obsessed with the future. Yeah, we can think about the future, but to be so afraid of the future is in itself a fuel for capitalist systems to prevail, because the capitalism itself thrives on our fear and then the promise of hope. That kind of knowledge enterprise whereby we are told what is uncertain or what is certain about the future in if you like, in a fearful manner, and the prescription of antidote, and the antidote which also follow a certain line of action taking. This has historically been the case in the way we think about knowledge production within the university system. Matu started with his population bomb argument and offered lines of mitigating it, and if you trace the interventions which followed, there were more interventions that were fueling the capitalist system. Agricultural expansion, mechanization of agriculture, and the rest, and the rest, and the rest. So if you bring it also in the realm of climate change, the whole big issue about climate change is nothing to me more than our fear of climate change itself. You see, but life goes beyond just being afraid of the future, and it connects to the concept of longevity, our will to live longer. But is it our will to live longer that matters most, or our will to live shorter in happiness?
Just very briefly, my name is Dort. I think fears may be expressed, but maybe the preconceived, the standard answers of Malthus and of the capitalist system and so on can be challenged. So I would propose that fears can be expressed. People can voice their fears, but the standard answers of Malthus and of capitalist answers to conservation and so on, we challenged, and therefore I think it's very nice and likely that you brought up the local knowledge. I often observe that local knowledge or other countervailing knowledge, the people who have a different type of thinking, very often I see that they easily swallow the dominant economic thinking, also which is taught in the universities. Maybe because people, these high-level people at the university, they're so eloquent. And therefore, I think it's very nice that this exercise of trying to articulate the continent narrative is very useful. These are just a few.
Well, many years ago when I was growing up, when I was maybe young or younger than now, I didn't have much fear. I would drive my car much too fast. There were speed limits, but there was no control. But in 2009, let's say first thing about the media. I have had a subscription of the Scientific American for over 20 years. I read about global warming the first time in 1988, so I did know it existed. But I never realized how bad it was until 2009. I was a back problem. I started to read about climate change, and it took me months to get to the bottom of it, to find the real data, the real publications. And I found out what is really happening. And then, I got scared because it's very bad. Now, okay, because if climate change is going on, we go through these tipping points, all the ice melts, and I always refer, there was one climate event 55 million years ago, when temperatures were so high up that there was forest on the whole of Antarctica, pine trees, and there were alligators and palms in Alaska and Greenland. I mean, that is the world if we don't stop. Now, and when I say now, we're talking about 5 to 10% decreasing the use of fossil fuels from now on. That means roughly in 30 years in a line straight down to zero in fossil fuels. If we don't do that, we pass this tipping point. The 2-degree limit that is officially recognized is, according to James Hansen, is insane. Look at the graphs we can. So it is bad. Should I fear it? Well, I do fear it. And if I wouldn't fear it, there's always in this type of discussions with people that say, oh, I don't believe in climate change, and then explain, and it's not so bad. Yeah, it's bad. Yeah, okay, then it happens, and then okay, maybe humans get extinct. Something else will come up. Well, maybe not, but it doesn't matter. My last argument always is, the atmosphere is also mine, and you have to keep out of it with your dirty carbon dioxide. The atmosphere is a global common property, common pool. It doesn't belong to one or some persons. It doesn't belong to Shell or to any other fossil fuel company. It belongs to the world, and it should be clean like the rivers. So I see it as a right an undeniable right to defend that. Only on the ground that the atmosphere is also mine, and nobody has the right to pollute this atmosphere with CO2. Period. Fear or not.
I think I agree.
Anybody doesn't agree with that? Okay. Then, as we saw, nothing worked the last 20 years in negotiations or whatever. In 1988 there was the Brundtland report where they defined, that's where the definition from sustainability comes from. And it's something like sustainable development is development that fulfills our needs from now, but doesn't harm the needs for the future. So in fact it means, in simple words, something is sustainable if you can do it now, and if you can do it eternally. That is sustainable, the definition. In 1992 the climate negotiations were started. It was the big conference in Rio. And if you look at the CO2 going up, it had zero effect. Nothing had effect. So how long are we going to wait? So you have to stand up. So say again, the climate games, Saturday 4th of July, with the surrounding camp. Come, you can just, it's playful. There are workshops in the camp, there are workshops, preparation, food, etc., etc. And the climate games itself is going to be fun. You can invent what you want, form a team, or come to the camp and form a team there. All kinds of possibilities. Then there are prizes, there's an after party. It was nice last year. It's going to be bigger, stronger, bolder. And in fact, it is now copied in Paris in November, December, around the COP21. Is also going to be a form of climate games. And you know, we need really everybody in this.
Yeah.
More questions? All tired after so long talk? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks again. Thank you for being here. Okay, so this part of our program is over tonight. We're gonna have a band at 7, Spray. It's gonna be folk music, acoustic folk actually. And afterwards we're gonna have a rave here and it's gonna be awesome. Please welcome. Goodbye. See you later. Dankjewel. Ja, leuk op zich. Ja. Oorspronkelijk op de nieuwe liberalisering van het klimaat en de universiteit. Dat was nog een andere aspect die heb je nog gezien op het podium.
Ja, ik heb het einde.
Ja, en hij heeft een beetje wat verteld en hij is van ground control.